Welcome everyone, I'm Sherold Barr and I'm thrilled today to welcome my guest. Dr. Rick Hanson is a neuropsychologist. He's author of Buddha's Brain, the practical neuroscience of love, happiness, and wisdom. And I've invited Rick back to talk to us today about fear and how we're wired for fear, and also about service and giving and how we're wired for service. Welcome, Rick.
My pleasure. It's really great to be here, and I'm afraid that fear is one of my favorite topics.
Good.
It's so central. You know, if you think of it, in evolution, fear is the original emotion. It's the primal emotion, and when we speak of fear, of course, we're talking about a kind of spectrum ranging from very subtle concern or apprehension or worry in the back of the mind at one end, all the way out to terror and panic at the other end. And most of the time, of course, we're talking about the kind of the milder end of that range, which is nonetheless pervading and, as we'll see, very often a kind of default setting that's automatic. That's the presumed normal. In other words, it's always threat level orange to the ancient reptilian and mammalian brain. And that becomes the water we swim in without realizing that we're wet. So then, as a result, we automatically tend to overestimate threats, underestimate opportunities, and underestimate resources. And the sum of that is what I call paper tiger paranoia. So let me just kind of talk through how that arose.
Okay.
And I think that understanding how this arose is really helpful because it gives us compassion for ourselves and for others who are in the grips of, some aspect on the range of fear. Mm-hmm. It also gives us more of a practical understanding for the wiring that led to these fears and surfaces them in terms of mindful awareness so that we can see them. You can't do anything about it if you don't see it in the first place. Mm-hmm. Okay, so to put this in context, a long, strange journey summarized in a couple of minutes. Organisms have been on this planet, life's been on this planet for about 3.5 billion years. Multi-celled creatures arose around 650 million years ago. They were complicated enough by around 600 million years ago that their sensory systems needed to talk to their motor systems, thus the beginning of the nervous system. So now we have creatures evolving, mammals coming in around 200 million years ago, primates around 60 or so million years ago, tool making, tool manufacturing hominids 2.5 million years ago, and then modern humans around 150,000 years ago, with really, really modern humans around 50,000 years ago. So that's the run of biological evolution. During that long run, rule one in the wild is eat lunch today, don't be lunch today. In other words, ancestors that were struggling to both approach carrots and avoid sticks needed to first and foremost be aware of sticks, in other words, threats, hazards, etc. Because if you fail to get a carrot today, you'll probably have a chance at a carrot tomorrow. But if you fail to avoid a stick today, no more carrots forever. Yeah. So that's why there is what scientists call a negativity bias that's embedded in and hardwired into the mammalian brain. The brain altogether, which then is elaborated in ever more complex ways in a human brain, which is, of course, the most complex brain on the planet. Mm-hmm. The bottom line is that people will, for example, do more to avoid a loss of something than they'll work hard to gain the same thing. People are loss aversive. They're focused on loss. Another aspect of the negativity bias is the finding that long-term happy couples need to have at least a 5-to-1 ratio of positive interactions to negative ones. That means, in effect, that a single negative reaction is as powerful as 5 positive ones. Another example of the negativity bias is how vulnerable we are as mammals to learning helplessness and acquiring a sense of defeat or failure or futility or despair. That's why I think it's incredibly important and why people like you are so great, to help people appreciate where they do have some influence over their life, right, which frankly is first and foremost inside the coconut, exactly, because that's where you have the most opportunity to do something, and of course, that's where you take the fruits with you, wherever you go, because there you are, as they say. Another example, my last one, I guess, of the negativity bias, is that when a negative event happens, the brain targets it and focuses on it, reacts intensely to it, instantly stores it. Once burned, twice shy. It's fast-tracked with dedicated memory systems to learn the lesson of the negative experience. And then it's stored in such a way that it can be retrieved at the least whiff of anything familiar.
If I can ask you something about that, I see this so often with my clients. And they've even asked me, why is it easy to remember these traumatic things? And I can't, it's not so easy to remember the good times. And that's because that's how we're wired.
It's exactly true.
Wow.
Mother Nature has honed us for, gene copies, for survival, passing on their genes. But quality of life is irrelevant, except insofar as it furthers passing on gene copies. The net of it, though, unfortunately, is that positive experiences, going to what you're saying, which is a good question. In other words, including positive experiences of adequacy, let's say, compared to negative experiences of low worth or guilt or failure or defeat. Positive experiences have plain vanilla memory systems, unless they're very novel or very intense, million-dollar moments. And so positive experiences need to be really held in short-term memory buffers for 10, 20, 30 seconds in a row, ideally with intensity and with repetition and with whole body awareness, for them to have a prayer of transferring to long-term storage. The problem is, how often do we actually do that? We may be having positive experiences, but they're relatively mild. They're in awareness as a discrete positive experience for maybe a few seconds at a time, and then we move on to the next thing, which could be even positive. But each individual positive experience doesn't sit there long enough to sink down into long-term storage. And in fact, positive experiences move through the brain like water through a sieve, but negative experiences are caught every time. And that makes the brain like Velcro for negative experiences, but Teflon for positive ones. That's the hardwired generic tendency of the brain developed by evolution to help our ancestors survive, and it's exacerbated by personal temperament. For example, some people are more anxious or melancholy or irritable than others. Second, it's intensified by life history. Some people have particularly bad things happen to them. It's also intensified by modern culture, which is very stimulating and jangling and busy and tends to drive us into chronic low-grade stress activation, activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And then last, in a story that's been told 10,000 times in history, various political groups will play on fear to gain or hold on to political power. So the net effect of that is that we live in this kind of fear-based mindset. If you think about it, in the wild, there are two kinds of mistakes. You can think there's a tiger in the bushes, but actually the coast is clear. Or you can think the coast is clear, but there really is a tiger in the bushes. And Mother Nature wants us to make the first mistake 1,000 times over to avoid making the second mistake even once. So the result of that, then, unfortunately, is for many people, I think most people in general, a default tendency that, as I said, tends to overestimate the bad news in life, whether it's out there in the Middle East or here, across the dinner table. Also, we tend to underestimate opportunities. We tend to chronically underestimate how good something could be or how likely a good thing is to happen. So we tend to play small. We muzzle our self-expression. I think this is particularly true based on socialization of women. And we tend to underestimate resources inside ourselves or out in our world that we could use to deal with threats or fulfill opportunities. And so for me, the takeaway of that is to be really mindful of fear and presumption of threat and skeptical. These feelings and these thoughts are guilty until proven innocent. And to obviously deal with real tigers. Third, to do practices like you teach and others teach for calming the body, activating the parasympathetic wing of the nervous system.
Okay. So a practice people can do multiple times a day?
Sensing that you've received a good thing.
Okay.
Whether it's you've received a good mouthful of food or a good breath of air, or you've received the sense that your body's working. It's not perfect, but it's working. It's okay. Ain't dead yet. you know? Or if you received the kindness of another person, or you've fulfilled a goal, you know, you've accomplished a task, even breaking a complex task like taking a shower into smaller parts, you know, opening the door, stepping in, you know, washing the hair, turning it off, stepping out, toweling off, changing clothes, you know, dressing, etc. Let alone, you know, more, you know, business-like things like completing a work project or getting something off the ground. You know, just take lots of little opportunities to feel fed, to feel satisfied, to feel completed and fulfilled. You know, we spend our days with a little voice in our head endlessly saying, not enough, not complete, there's more, well, you got that done, but there are 19 more to go, you know, blah, 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 blah. But what kind of voice is whispering to us, like Fauna, Flora, and Merriweather, the three godmothers in Sleeping Beauty? Yeah, you did that. Inhalation accomplished. Email sent. Dish washed. Food made. Kid in bed. Communication completed. Something learned. Words read. You know what I mean? We need to have more of that in our head because we have that yammering voice. You want to know why we don't feel adequate? Because this one has got a giant megaphone and a stadium loudspeaker system. And this one is whispering occasionally.
Right. That's a wonderful, thank you for that.